Hello, this is Vince, and this is a video that is meant to kind of give an introduction to words as I or we understand how to use it. This is mainly aimed for the bachelor students who, in my experience, have been given no actual instruction on how to access words or how to use it. And so, to kind of save time and to kind of make sure that we're all prepared and we know what we have to work with, I kind of want to walk through a few of the key places in words, as well as a few things that we need to be careful of. So there are two main databases in words that we need to be aware of. The first one is CRSP. Now, CRSP is actually an acronym, CRSP, and we click that, the Center for Research Security Prices, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and in CRSP, what we want from CRSP is almost always, if not always, stock return data. I am going to kind of assume a complete beginner bit here. We're not going to talk about the CRSP Compustat merge, although that is something that if you are a professor or getting a PhD, that this is something that is worth investigating and learning about. But for simplicity in getting started, we always want to do stock security files. So the stock security files is fine. And so here is what we're looking at here. So we have daily stock file, monthly stock file, and other stuff. So these are kind of the two that we want to pay attention to. The choice between the two is just based on your project, and we're not going to cover that here, but just so it doesn't take me an hour to download a file, let's click monthly stock file. The setup for getting data from Compustat or CRSP is pretty similar across the databases, so I'm going to cover it in detail for CRSP and kind of skip over it for the others. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to look at a date range. So for me personally, I like to go back like pretty far. I mean, as far as you'd expect others to go. But since, again, it's CRSP, I don't want to like overload my computer, so I'll just start at 2000 just for kicks and go to 2022. And so the vast majority of the time, you're not going to be doing any of this stuff. I mean, if you have perm numbers or tickers or whatever in a nice format, in a text file ready to go for it, use this, but don't be afraid to search the entire database. Now, if you're confident in your ability to wait and your computer's ability to take things, then hey, we'll just click select all and just download it from there. However, let's not do that. I usually just scroll down. If I'm not it depends on what I'm looking for specifically, but the things that I think are kind of an all-around you should be getting are QSIP, NQSIP, just for completeness, company name. Not really necessary, but ticker might come in handy. The perm number is important. Price is important. And holding period return, RET. So price and return are pretty much the two big ones you want from CRSP. Now I'm just looking around here to verify if there's nothing else that I want to really do. Okay, cool. So this, I don't think I've ever really used this and not regretted it. So this is just like a conditional. If like, for example, you want to only take firms from the United States, assuming there's a variable for that, you can kind of filter that out before downloading it. Now here is kind of where you have some choices. So whatever programming language you're using to process this data is kind of what you're going to want to do. It is tempting to download it to an Excel file and then import it however you want. However, there are some cases where Excel in its own format may format it a certain way, and then when you import it to another program, it's going to keep some of these Excel quirks. For example, Excel will, for convenience, if they have like a 9-digit QSIP that's all numbers, or if it has a letter E in it, it'll treat it like an exponentiated number. And then when you import it to Stata, it will literally say 9E7, and it's just a bad time. So I suggest that you do not import it to Excel unless you're specifically using Excel to process the data, which is not recommended. CSV is what you should be doing. It opens in Excel, but it's not really corrupted by the Excel way of operating. But of course, Stata file or SAS, or even just a text file, those are all fine. Now, some would say that if you're going to download data, you should do it in a zip file. I agree with this. I will say that when you're going to have to extract it for the full size anyway, but let's just put it in zip anyway. And of course, I usually just keep the date format. One thing that students mess up sometimes somehow is they have different date formats when they download different data sets. So if you have like an external data set that's not from Words and it has a different date format, then make sure it does match, or else you're going to have to go through a headache of reformatting them. But I usually just keep it at the default. This, don't care, and submit form. So when you see submit form, it will say query whatever successfully submitted. And we're going to click up here and it's going to run. And I don't know how long it's going to take. 20 years of monthly data. This could take a while. Oh, hey, it's done actually. That didn't take that long. So another reason to not use Excel file output is because we see in this data set, we have over 2 million observations. So if we have 2 million observations and we import it to Excel, what's going to happen is it won't really work because Excel has a limit of like 1.4 million or something. So we have this output file, which it's only 23 megabytes. I don't believe that, but all right. And so it's going to have like a really bizarre name like this. So I just recommend just take it and put it wherever, as Taylor Swift once said, you can call it what you want. And so we have this CSV file. It's technically associating with Excel, but let's open Stata and just verify that there's nothing wrong with it. We are importing it. CSV. It's taking its time. So I want to take a look at a couple things. Again, we're using Stata. If you use R or another language, I am not entirely sure if this follows, but it's nice to see, or I think an R would also have like a variable format here. So one thing that's important to notice specifically about CRSP, so we have price in black, that means it's a number, but red means it's a string. Now a string is kind of like numbers, letters, just like text, where a number is actually has a numeric value. Now I think if you're looking at R or another, it'll say it's a string, like see it's a string 9. And that is because sometimes in this variable, it may have something that is not a number. So just when you use something that's not Excel, it gives you a bit more information. Now let's go back to the home and go to the next one, Compustat. So Compustat is the next big boy. So Compustat is for where you're going to go for most of the things. If you're not going to be using stock returns, then you don't need to use CRSP. You're going to most likely be going to Compustat. So when you go to Compustat, so Compustat capital IQ, we're going to cover a couple different things here. So the big two, so of course there's a lot of stuff here, but the top two you're going to use are North America, or if you really want to, you can use global, but most, even authors and publications use North America, and Execucomp. So let's start with North America. And fundamentals annual is going to be the big one. Sometimes people want to use quarterly, but fundamentals annual is what you're going to be looking at. Now, very similar to how CRSP worked is we have, a date range, which let's just, for the sake of it, go back to 2000. Oh, 1999, why not? And we have the same choice, just choose everything, and a bunch of stuff that you can modify, but I never really cared to. And we have some variables. So important variables to check. GV key is kind of like perm number, but for Compustat, this is a really important one. Company name just for completeness, ticker and QSIP. And then fiscal year end, that's not a thing we're going to cover, but that is important to keep in mind. And also, I recommend not selecting all because it's almost 1,000 variables here. So just a few key ones, total assets, and then maybe dividends, something like that. Common dividends, dividends total. CEQ, I think, is common equity. DT is total debt. And let's say CapEx. Like these are, I mean, this is not comprehensive, and these are like variables that most studies use, either as a main variable or a control or something like that. But now let's take a look. Yeah, same thing. You know, you can put it in a zip file, comma delimited, whatever, submit form. So this one's a bit smaller, so not going to be as much of a headache. And so again, just to refresh, CRSP is for like stock returns and Compustat is for firm financials. Now those are the two big ones. I do want to point to a couple other things. A lot of students of mine have wanted to do either CEO compensation or other managers or boards of directors. And so for CEO compensation, you're going to want to go to Execucomp. And I usually just go to annual compensation. So I'm not going to download and do that whole thing, but just keep in mind that GV key is also the firm identifier for Execucomp. So merging Compustat, the main Compustat, and Execucomp is actually very simple because they use the same identifier. The other data set or database that's worth noting is BoardEx. So this is if you want to understand boards of directors. They usually have something with independence and whatnot. And so I'm not super familiar with BoardEx. I mean, I usually go to like individual profile and maybe employment. And they have, you know, director ID, board position. I wouldn't bet on how effective this is, but if you want, you can say, so here I was actually just looking like, how do you find independent directors on BoardEx? And so here it actually gives a guide. And so the data vendor type NED one is individual profile. Employment, the definition of the variable is an indicator showing if it's executive or super. That is, so essentially that's search. You can search. So other places for data. There's also the Erasmus library. If you are part of Erasmus University, if you're not, this might not really apply to you. But if you go to the Erasmus University library and you go to finance, there are also a lot of other databases and you can search. But they do have BoardEx, and they will say things like via words. They have audit information, a bunch of crap. But a couple that I want to highlight, DealScan is about if you are looking at loan specifics, like if you want to actually look at the loan agreements of firms. IBIS, which is about analyst forecasts. Zephyr, this one's not super covering, but people have asked where we have merger, M&A activity, IPOs, and things like that. Zephyr is where you want to look.